1. For this to make sense, I have to give a brief history on my upbringing. My mom left when I was 4 and my brother was 2. My dad took on full custody and we ended up moving in with my grandparents. I talked to my mother on the phone occasionally and we'd see her for a few days every 1 or 2 years. When I was 13, Dad moved us into our own house and Mom decided she was going to move back. At the time, I had it in my head that it would be a Gilmore Girls kind of relationship. I even binge-watched as many episodes as I could think in preparation. When she got into town, it didn't take me long to realize that our relationship would be anything but. Mom would drink while abusing her prescriptions of benzodiazepines. She'd go out all night leaving me awake until, if she got back safe. When I confronted her, she would threaten to leave us again. I'd come home from school to find her intoxicated with bottles of wine next to her limp body. I don't remember when exactly, but it couldn't have been more than a year before she finally did leave. Given the circumstances of her behavior, it was probably for the best. What you gonna do? I could go on, but this story isn't about her. It's just a coincidental outcome of an unfortunate circumstance. I live in Florida. More specifically, tourist fucking city, well, the outskirts. You can imagine the dangers that lurk around you in the outskirts of a beautiful city. Walking alone at night was something I was cautious about, yet fearless of. Even when the sharks were out, I walked confidently. Sharks are what I used to call predators. They'd prey on you in an obvious fashion. When I'd walk down one of our main roads at night, they'd follow you, and the only way you'd be able to tell it was a shark was if they turned around and continued to circle until you either weren't in view or made it to the store across the busy road. In hindsight, the red flags were painfully obvious to just how dangerous they were. The sharks were always watching, and I was an easy target. One night, I caught my brother trying to sneak out. He was 12 at the time and wanted to go to the beach in a state of painful nostalgia. The memorable nights with Mom before our image of her completely diminished. "I'm going no matter what," he said. I couldn't let him go alone, and I didn't have time to wake Dad up before he was outside and I was following. For good measure, I grabbed a random screwdriver sitting outside. The ride on our bikes to the beach was pretty uneventful, and I hardly remember the beach itself. We snuck into one of those accesses that had closed hours ago, stayed for a while, shared stories about Mom, and went back to our bicycles. The ride back took a different turn on the same road. Around 2 a.m. Sharks are always lurking, and the dangerous ones don't live in the water. As soon as I got to the main road home, a car began to follow us. I warned my brother and told him to take a swift turn down one of the back roads. The 4-door sedan casually followed. 2:30 a.m. Austin dropped his bike in the yard of one of my friends' houses, jumping over their backyard fence. This was just in time for the car to turn and see me as I ran to the corner of their small patio, dropping the screwdriver I had taken, just in case. I sat there with knees tucked to my chest, as still as a statue. The car was still stopped in the road facing the house. I didn't move for what seemed like minutes, but in all likelihood it had only been seconds. The car flashed their headlights on me. On, off, on, off. They say that adrenaline gives you extra human strength. You turn into a superhero in a sense. I wasn't a superhero, but it was the biggest rush I had ever had. I could hear my grandmother telling me to scream as loud as I could if I was ever in a situation similar to this. Pouncing up from my crippling fear, I began hitting the door. I heard the car door open and heavy footsteps bear towards me. I screamed and hit the door as loud and hard as I could through the otherwise dark, quiet neighborhood. I saw his shadow, but didn't dare look back. The door swung open, and a boy a few years older than me answers in shock. His eyes wide as he looks behind me, grabs my arm and pulls me inside. "Get in!" His mother comes out, arms folded and rubbing her eyes. "What happened?" she asked. "This girl was pounding on the door, so I opened it. There was a man right behind her. He was reaching out to grab her until I pulled her in. Then he ran back to his car and left." 3 a.m. She lectured us about being out so late and what could have happened. Her advice didn't fall on deaf ears. To this day, there's 2 things I won't do at night: swim or walk outside alone. 2. This happened when I was a lot younger, and sometimes I still think about it, so I decided to write it down. At the time this happened, I was 10 years old, going to school in Osaka, Japan. I lived in America, but every summer my mom would take my younger sisters and I to Japan to see her mother and make us go to school, since Japanese schools go on until late July before their summer break. In the mornings, I would walk to school with my sisters and everything was usually okay. Although we'd get the occasional odd stare, since despite still being half Japanese, in a small town like that, where no tourists ever came, we stuck out like a sore thumb. However, once school was over, I was usually unable to walk home with my sisters because of after-school clubs, and the clubs ending at different times. At least I had a few friends who could walk me home, however, and give me some company, so I rarely ever was alone. One day I decided I didn't want to stay for my club and that I just wanted to go home early and play some Wii. I knew my mom wouldn't mind, since I had decided to join a not-too-important club, which was the cooking club. My friends, however, had more obligations than I did, since they actually lived in Japan and went to the school year-round, unlike me, and could not accompany me home. My walk home started out fine, but rather quickly my 10-year-old self felt something was off. There was a man with a baseball cap wearing one of those cold masks, which isn't honestly that uncommon in Japan, with baggy clothing following me. He was still a fair distance away from me too, so since I was a pretty naive kid, I shrugged it off and kept walking. But pretty soon after, I heard footsteps pretty close behind me now. I figured it was a different person, but being curious, I turned my head to see the same man closing the distance between us fairly quickly. I remember starting to feel pretty nervous at that point. A quick point here before I continue. In the town I was at, there's lots of small alleys and streets that are all connected, so you can take plenty of wrong turns and still end up home, as long as you have a decent idea as to where your house is. My brain doesn't function well when I'm nervous or stressed, so instinctively, I turned into a small alleyway, which was honestly the most dumb thing I could have done. But at the time, I figured that the man would keep walking and that would resolve all of this. But instead he turned into the alleyway as well. At this point, I started fast walking. I didn't want to straight up run, since I still wasn't 100% sure he was following me. And running would come off as kind of rude if the man wasn't following me. I began making random turns into streets and narrow alleys that I had never stepped foot into before, hoping that the man wouldn't follow me. Surely he was just an innocent man trying to get somewhere. However, even my dumb 10-year-old brain knew that after the 5th or 6th time I had made a random turn with the man still following me, that I was in danger. At the time, I was in a narrow alleyway with walls that were way taller than I was, so I couldn't see what was up ahead or next to me. I decided I should start running, not thinking that a grown man would be faster than me. Again, I was a dumb kid. Also, I was weighed down by my backpack and water bottle, so I can only imagine how slow I was. I could hear his footsteps much louder against the asphalt, and I was beyond scared shitless at this point. I was sure I was going to get kidnapped and then murdered. I remember running with everything I had, to the point I was afraid I'd literally run myself into the ground. I was way too terrified to even cry or scream. But the alleyway went out into a street I recognized where there was a supermarket, and thankfully, there were several people, either walking or on their bicycles. I slowed down immediately. I was a self-conscious kid and didn't want to attract more attention to myself than my foreign looks already were. I turned around once more to see the man who was simply standing there for a few moments before walking in the direction of the supermarket. But I knew there was no way that was his destination this whole time. I had taken the weirdest route, and there were much easier ways that he could have used if he wanted to go to the supermarket. I remember telling my mom, who then contacted my school. I got in some trouble for deciding to go home alone that day, and afterwards, a teacher always made sure there was at least one kid with me when I went home. 3. Preface 1. When I was around 13, me and my best friend were really into the Fear Street and Goosebumps novels by R.L. Stine. Being the really dramatic goth emo punk teenagers we were at that time, we really wished something interesting, meaning scary, would happen in our own lives. Well, how stupid of me. Preface 2. My best friend and I somehow got into a friend group of just guys all around 16 to 18 years old from the next town over. They were really nice and we had a lot of fun every time we met, like once or twice a week and on the weekends. For this story only Dick and Stu are relevant. Dick was a tall blonde guy that had ADHD, was a weapon enthusiast and drove a Vespa around town. Stu was more of the shy and quiet type, and we were good friends for a brief time. This all happened in the age of MSN and MySpace, so a lot of contact was held over chatting on MSN. When my best friend and I started hanging out with this group of guys, everything was alright. Being not very girly ourselves, I think we were seen as one of the guys pretty quick, instead of being somebody's girlfriend anytime soon. But over the time of one summer, Dick and I got really close, and before the school started again, he confessed that he really liked me. I wasn't into him at first, but being a teenager overflowing with hormones, one thing led to another, and we ended up dating within the week. He was my first real boyfriend, and I was pretty excited. At first. Our romance only lasted a week though, and the aftermath several months. To get to the point, I ended the relationship after 7 days because he was just too intense for my liking. After like 3 days of chatting a lot and making out once at his place, he told me about a dream he had. It sounded something like this. I dreamed that I was meeting you in the city. When you were walking up to me, I was surprised at first, because you were holding the hand of a small boy who was walking right next to you. As you were walking closer, I began to realize that he was our kid. He had my hair, but your face, and your eyes especially. I was so happy, and I gave you two a huge hug before I woke up. Being 13, I was pretty shocked to hear something like this from my boyfriend of 3 days. After giving him an answer like, you know I am only 13 and not thinking about having kids at all right now, the matter soon resolved in him saying, don't worry, I just wanted to tell you about this dream. And we changed the subject. A few days later, and another date at his house, he and I landed on his bed making out. At first it was harmless teenager kissing, but he soon indicated he wanted to have sex. I said no and he asked again a little bit more insistently. I refused again and he got visibly upset. I went home and had to rethink this relationship. The next day I felt really uncomfortable chatting with him and decided that I really was not that into him at all, and would rather not be in a relationship with him. We met on the weekend with our group of friends and I took him aside and talked about it with him. He was sad but said he wanted to remain friends, to which I agreed. We hugged goodbye and he went home. I explained to the others what happened and they all took it without further questions and we all moved on. He mentioned a few times since the breakup that he was still really hung up on me and that I should give him another chance. I always explained that I don't feel this way and he shut up about it for a few days before he spoke of it again. I don't really remember how much time passed, but it must have been a few weeks or months of this behavior. It escalated when one day, while just casually hanging out, some other friends of the guys joined our shared group, and along with them came Stu. We all always hung out together with nobody just having private hangouts or something, but I assume seeing me and Stu having a good time while out with everybody, Dick started to get really jealous. His demeanor changed and he became mad and aggressive more often than usual. He tried to talk shit about Stu behind his back to me via MSN, and all in all just really acted aggressively towards him and me. I really had nothing going on with Stu, so I was confused and annoyed. Dick's jealousy grew with every weekend we all met up, it seemed, and he attacked me verbally more often these days. He even threatened to kill me or himself if I wouldn't be with him. These threats upset me pretty much and I tried to talk to a school counselor about it, as I felt threatened by him. But she seemed overwhelmed by this too and just told me to ignore him. I didn't tell my mother. My dad was AFK since I was 8. because she and I were not having the best relationship at that time, and I kept all my stuff to myself. One faithful evening, Dick chatted with me about Stu and told me, again, that he still has feelings for me and does not want me to date anybody else. I was really fed up with this by now and told him off. That it is none of his business who I date, and I do not feel the same about him. This argument heated up pretty quickly as he sent me a corny message like this. "If I can't have you, nobody will." At first I cringed, but as he logged off from the messenger afterwards, I became worried. What was he up to? I was also chatting with another shared friend at that time and asked him if Dick was just offline, as it was possible in MSN to be seen as offline but still be online and being able to chat with people. He responded, "No, he said something about getting his gun cleaned and left." Now I was really upset. I knew that he had a rifle and a few guns at home. Now I think these might just have been air guns, but what do I know? And as I said, he was really into weapons and stuff. But I did not know how dangerous he could be. I asked a friend if he thought Dick could be dangerous, and he replied again, "He seemed pretty upset. If I were you, I wouldn't go outside tonight." I panicked and called my best friend. She freaked too and told her parents. Mine weren't at home. I was a latchkey kid. To which her father offered to come over if I felt unsafe. They lived right next door. I didn't want to make a scene and told him thanks and I'd call if I'm scared. I spent the rest of the evening on the phone with my best friend and sitting by our front window watching the street and hoping not to hear any moped or Vespa driving by. Around 10 p.m. I saw Dick approaching our neighborhood fast on his Vespa. I screamed into the phone that he's here. Terrified, I just kept on watching the street and hoping he would just leave. But Dick stopped a few houses down on a parking lot and got off his Vespa. I could not see in the dark if he had a gun or rifle with him, but I was scared nonetheless. For a few minutes, nothing happened, and Dick just waited there and seemingly stared up to our house, as I was staring down at him. Then my best friend's dad came out of their house and walked up to Dick and engaged a conversation. I later was told that he asked him to leave and to never come back, that I did not want to see him ever again, and if he'll return, that the police will be called. This seemed to be all it took, as Dick drove off into the night, and her father returned home. I asked him later if Dick had a gun, to which he replied, "Don't worry about it." I still don't know if that was a yes or a no. The whole thing resolved itself pretty anticlimactically afterwards. Dick left me alone for a few days and didn't show up for a few weeks to our hangouts. My friend and I soon moved on to another friend group, and we all lost touch with Dick and the other guys. I've met Dick a handful of times after that, but I always tried to avoid him and we never talked again. I am not superstitious at all, but I learned from this experience and never made wishes like having a more interesting life again. And Dick, let's never meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 373. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I must say, in the final story there, Dick was indeed appropriately named. Sorry there was no stream this weekend, but I think I'm going to dial back on the streams for a little while I get my health and everything sorted out a bit. And when I come back to doing them, I think maybe just once a month, so I'm not boring everybody. And we've got something possibly interesting things to talk about while we're doing them. On a brighter note, I finally picked the microphone I was going to get. I'm going to go for the Rode NT1. I've currently got the NT1A. I'll go for the slightly newer version, which is an NT1. Isn't really much of a difference in sound. I think I can hear a very slight difference, but that might just be in my head. So I'll get that one. I have listened to others and everything, and I trust the Rode mics, so I'll go with that, and I'll keep this one here, which is still working. It's just getting a little bit troublesome here and there. I'll keep that just for doing the old streaming thing when I get back to it. So I'll need to get another. I think I'll need to get another mic stand as well. That way I'll just need to move the interface up and down for when I'm actually talking to people. And that should be fine. I can just keep that behind a chair or something in the living room out of the way. It should be fine there. So I'll order the new microphone. It'll probably next week. I'm going to wait till I get paid. So it should be sometime after the 21st, so it might actually be around about the 25th by the time everything's sorted. So yeah, that should be new microphone day. Should be just around the corner for me. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.